Okay, well, we're live. Live on YouTube and we're live on Zoom, and I see the room is filling up, so we'll get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Mark Mamgonian. I'm the Director of Academic Affairs at the National Association for Armenian Studies and Research, NAASR. Thank you for joining us today to hear Professor Zeynep Devrim Gürsel present Portraits of Unbelonging, Photography, the Ottoman State and the Making of Armenian Immigrants, 1896 to 1908. I cannot help but be struck by the high level of interest in today's presentation, as shown in the overwhelming number of registrants and undoubtedly the large number of people who are viewing on YouTube. So that is fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us on a Sunday for this fantastic talk. I have one announcement of an upcoming event this week. On Thursday, July 30th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, NAASR will present a program that has, in light of recent events, I guess, taken on an unexpected sort of timeliness. And it's called Cultural Destruction, Cultural Memory, the Heritage of the Khachkars of Julfa, Old Julfa, which will be a panel discussion featuring Ani Babayan, Simon Mahakian, and Christina Maranzi, and will mark the upcoming 15th anniversary of the final destruction of the Khachkars of Old Julfa by the Azeri military, while also exploring the artistic, cultural, and religious significance of Khachkars through the ages. Now, before we hear from Professor Gürsel, I want to thank the co-sponsors of today's program, the Exclusion Museum of Mission Hills, California, and Project Save Armenian Photograph Archives based in Watertown, Mass. They are not only our partners in today's program, but also key partners in the research of our speaker today. And I would like to call upon my colleagues and friends, Maggie Mangasarian-Goshen, the director of the Exclusion Museum, and Solin Saryan, the executive director of Project Save, to say a few words on behalf of their organizations for today. Whoever wants to go first, Maggie or Solin. Maggie?
Okay, thank you. Welcome, everyone. I just want to say thank you to Mark and to Solin for participation, and for those who are joining us from close and far. And Dr. Gürsel, thank you very much for re-accepting our offer to do it online through Zoom. This was scheduled for May 9th, but because of the pandemic, we had to reschedule. So I want to say also to my friend, Ruth Tomasian, maybe she's somewhere in the picture, listening to us, for all her great work and the vision that she has, and Solin is continuing the great work that she does. So this is a proof of the importance of Project Save and the hard work that Boston NAASR does. So thank you, Dr. Gürsel, and back to you, Solin.
Thank you. I also say thank you to NAASR and the Ararat Exclusion Museum. Project Save Archives is so glad to co-sponsor this event featuring Dr. Gürsel. When she visited our archives this past December, she made some discoveries within our collection. In addition, we were able to connect her with 3 families, which further advanced her research. We often speak of how our photographs are used in publications, films, genealogy, and today Zeynep will share her experience as a researcher. At Project Save Archives, we collect photographs of all periods from anywhere around the world Armenians have lived. I remind you that we preserve and protect the photographs so that they're not lost, destroyed, or forgotten, which may happen if they're in boxes in your attic or in the bottom of your closets, or worse, thrown away. Most importantly, we make the photos available to share our Armenian heritage and culture. Please consider contributing your photographs to Project Save Armenian Photograph Archives. Our website, projectsave.org, has more information. Contributing your photographs, making your photographs accessible, will contribute significantly to important research like Zeynep's. Once again, our website is projectsave.org. Thanks for allowing me to make that pitch for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Solin and Maggie. Absolutely, it's great to work with 2 wonderful organizations like the Art Exclusion Museum and Project Save, not just today, but on many occasions in the past and in the future. There's the work that's being done is so valuable and important. So thank you very much. Now, as someone personally with a deep interest in the early history of the Armenian American community, which we might call the period from the last quarter of the 19th century up until World War I, and in the great history, the interest in the history of Armenian immigration during this period, and which has been written about by so few authors, actually. We would look at the work of Robert Myrack back in the 1980s, and much more recently, the work of David Gutman in his book that was published last year. This is really an unexplored subject area in many respects, even today, as well as having an interest in Armenian photographs of this period. I was knocked for a loop this past winter when I had the opportunity to meet with and talk to Zeynep Gürsel one afternoon over in what Bob Dylan calls the green pastures of Harvard University. I was mostly unaware of her project, or even that the work that she was doing was a thing that existed to be researched. So I was completely blown away. At the end of our very long afternoon's conversation, or grilling, since actually I kept peppering her with question after question and she kept telling me more and more, it was obvious that a lecture would have to be arranged. And as Maggie has already indicated, a springtime talk at the Art Exclusion Museum had to be canceled due to the pandemic, but here we are today. What impressed me so much was not only the novelty and the significance of the subject, but its relevance to both understanding the history of that time, as well as what it tells us about things that are happening today. But I was also taken with the depth of her knowledge and the intensity of the research she's doing, as well as the fact that this is clearly not an exercise in pure research for research's sake, but that it has a human and an ethical component that I think you will hear loud and clear coming through in the presentation that will follow. This has a human dimension, and I think that's an important part that is not lost on our speaker today. Dr. Zeynep Devrim Gürsel is a media anthropologist and is associate professor in the Department of Anthropology at Rutgers University. She studied at Yale University and holds master's and PhD degrees from the University of California, Berkeley. She's the author of Image Brokers, Visualizing World News in the Age of Digital Circulation, and the director of the award-winning ethnographic film Coffee Futures, which explores contemporary Turkish politics through the prism of the everyday practice of coffee fortune telling. Maybe that's the only way to understand politics anywhere today, I'm not sure. She's been researching photography in the late Ottoman period for more than a decade, and Portraits of Unbelonging, her project, is the first in-depth exploration of the official role of photography in the history of Armenian emigration to the United States. Lastly, please remember that questions can only be submitted via the Zoom Q&A function. Please make them short and on topic, and we will get to as many as we can while keeping within our time limits and not overtaxing our speaker. So I turn things now over to our speaker. Please welcome Zeynep Gürsel.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Maggie and Mark and Soline and all of you who are listening in on a Sunday afternoon. I'm going to speak for about 35 minutes and then hopefully take your questions. Now, I'm a cultural anthropologist, which means I very much enjoy meeting people. And I was really looking forward to meeting with all of you in person. But I had already promised Maggie over a year ago that I would do this talk and didn't want to keep her waiting any longer. So what I have tried to do as a photography scholar is to prepare something special for you using the affordances of Zoom. Because as a photography scholar, I learn most by looking together with other people and by looking closely at things. And that's usually very difficult to do in large groups. So I hope that by being together yet apart on our various screens, we can do that together today. And if it doesn't work at all, then you can complain and we'll never do it again. Okay. So I'm thrilled to share this research with you. I hope by the end of this time, you'll see why it has absolutely captivated my imagination for many years. So much of my work to date has been about photography and politics and the relationship between the two. So let me, before I get going, share my screen. Let's go to the title page here. Oops. Okay, how is that? Are we on the title page? Good? All right, great. So as you'll see from my title, photography and politics are the two lenses through which I will look at Armenian migration to the United States from 1896 and 1908. And that time period is very important for why I refer to this as emigration. But I want to begin by situating us in the Ottoman Empire at the end of the 19th century during the reign of Sultan Abdülhamid II, which is 1876 to 1908. So what was happening politically and what was happening photographically in this period, right? So by any standards, this period was critical and tumultuous in Ottoman history. Part of the political turmoil had to do with tentative and often violent nation-building projects, both on the borders and also within the Ottoman Empire, as well as an influx of refugees, mostly Muslim refugees from the Caucasus and the Balkans, but this influx of refugees significantly changed the landscape of the multi-ethnic and multi-confessional populations in the empire. Now, Sultan Abdülhamid's reign began in 1876 with the suspension of the first Ottoman parliament, and it ended in 1909 with the reopening of the parliament, his deposition, and the beginning of what we refer to as the second constitutional period. So this is a transitional period, one during which the very landscape of Ottoman subjecthood was changing, a time when individuals were shifting from being considered and considering themselves as subjects to becoming citizens, right? A process that certainly happened in fits and starts and not evenly across classes or across populations within the empire. Now, why is this important to somebody who studies photography? Photographically, aside from flourishing studio photography, this was a time of immense activity in the empire, right? Abdülhamid dispatched photographers to 4 corners of the empire, and he asked that they produce interior and exterior views of all important buildings, so prisons, schools, barracks, hospitals. The resulting archive of 35,000 images, today housed in Istanbul University's Rare Books Library, documents imperial projects such as modernization of military and government facilities, Ottoman healthcare and manufacturing, massive engineering projects, right, educational reform, and it also includes a large collection of police photography. Now, when I began studying this very tumultuous era in Ottoman history, I sought to better understand the photography as a tool for governmentality, right? Because even when they depict groups, photographs always index individuals. So as the contours of Ottoman subjecthood was changing, at what moments did subjects become photographed individuals for the eyes of the state, right? Whether I'm looking at medical imagery or prison portraiture, my key question is under what conditions were individuals brought into photographic visibility? Now, after spending many years looking at the photographs, I moved in about 2014 to the Ottoman State Archives and started trying to get a better sense of how the state, what roles the state was giving to photography and how photography showed up in state documents and state files. I chanced upon the portraits that I will talk to you about today in the Ottoman State Archives in Istanbul. So I'm going to begin by showing you some of the photographs. Part 1, making state photographs. We are in the Ottoman State Archive. Unmaking Nationals, a moment in bureaucratic time. And I'll come back to this issue of time. To date, I've gathered just over 100 photographs, 108 to be exact. They look just like any other family portraits at the turn of the 20th century. They're so banal as to be nearly invisible. These are photographs of Armenian families, men, women, family elders, children, babies. The photographs immediately make clear that the individuals are not only poor peasants or urban elites, but rather a diverse mix of individuals. Now, photographs are more than their visual content. They are always material objects. They exist in time and space. So I'm going to flip these over for you to explain why I consider these quintessential state documents. On the reverse of each image, in the hand of an Ottoman state official, the names, fathers' names, and ages of each individual photographed are methodically noted, along with the family's hometown. So you'll see we get all of that information for all of the 11 people in this photograph, right? Occasionally you'll see, as you do here, that the individuals have been numbered, and you'll see that the back of the photograph has the same numbers, so you can tell exactly who is who in the photographs. Oops. There we go. Let me show you the translation for one of them because they're very standard. Even if I don't consider these family portraits proper, and I'm going to return to that claim, each of these photographs serves as a kinship document. Now, what do I mean by that? Of course, you're thinking she's an anthropologist, she's got to talk about kinship, but here's what I mean. Look at what is the information provided on the back of this photograph. We've got Dikran Asaryan, right? His father's name, the neighborhood that he's from in Sivas, then we have his wife, birth date, their daughters and children's names, each one by one, right? And I think very importantly, if you look down to Surin here, number 7, the aforementioned adopted son. Now I've put adopted in quotes because I'm loosely translating the word manevi, which could be stepchild, adopted child, child taken in by the family. And it's clearly noted that Surin's father, Avedis, has died. And yet what is very interesting to me about this photograph is that by being photographed with the Asaryan family, this photograph is essentially making him part of the family unit, okay? And making it permissible for him to travel with this family. Now, why do I mention travel? Because in each of these photographs, not only do we have the names, birth dates, and hometowns of each of these people, but at the bottom, you'll have something like photograph of aforementioned Dikran with 6 members of his family taken for their emigration to America on the condition of never returning and renouncing their Ottoman nationality. These photographs enacted a form of exclusion. This is why I call them portraits of unbelonging. These photographs legally unmake these individuals as Ottoman Armenians. The families in the photographs are from Sebastia, Sivas, right, Harpert, Bitlis, Marzvan, Adana, Merzifon, Garin, areas where at the end of each of these towns at the end of the 19th century had significant Armenian populations. It's estimated that about 75% of Ottoman Armenians by the end of the 19th century lived in the interior of the empire. Now, what I've shown you here on this map in blue are the ports from which they departed, right? Samsun, Trabzon on the Black Sea up here, and Mersin, Iskenderun down here on the Mediterranean. These were the ports from which individuals boarded ships bound for Marseille, Le Havre, Liverpool, or Manchester. The vast majority of these families were bound for America, bound for Fresno, Boston, Chicago, New York, Los Angeles. Here is the Keshishian family's Takitavia photograph. I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you, Takitavia means renunciation of nationality. And so when I speak of Takitavia photographs, I mean these photographs that were taken to renounce nationality. This is the Keshishian family's Takitavia photograph. Now, according to migration scholars I've consulted, and I've bugged every person who would give me the time of day, this is one of the earliest known examples anywhere in the world of photography being used to police borders, right? With an important exception being the Chinese Exclusion Act in the United States, and we can come back to that in Q&A. Now, as artifacts of immigration history, these photographs are exceptional in that they show individuals before they left for America. In what context might a state have photographed those who were leaving rather than photograph arriving strangers? Now, passports did not have photographs until World War I, right? Here is the Keshishian family's passport, kindly provided by their family. You can see it has no photograph. Yet these images, I would argue, these Takitavia photographs, are both predecessors and antitheses of contemporary passport photos, right? Passport photos confirm a bearer's nationality. These photographs instead document unbelonging. These Armenian Ottoman subjects received their passports, their permission to travel and emigrate on the explicit condition that they never return. Now, the production and circulation of these photographs were to be under the jurisdiction of the police, right? I know this because many of the photographs bear a police commission stamp on the back. Now, these photographs that are taken by the police often have small clues that tell us that these photographs' purpose, they were taken as functional bureaucratic images to be filed away, not cherished family heirlooms, right? So you have a crooked backdrop or a draped curtain intended to serve as a backdrop has been forgotten in framing the shot. Here you have a photograph that has been pasted, but too low. Or here it's been pasted upside down altogether if you look at the top of the image. You know, small details that a professional photographer would not have done. Haphazard mounting, or mounting it on the wrong side altogether. Right, so this should be where the photograph is. Here is an extensive series taken by Harput police authorities in 1907. Right, you can see here the biographical information has been noted on the front of the image as well as on the back. Here's an entire set, again from Harput, showing women who are seeking permission, petitioning to emigrate in order to join fathers or husbands or men who they are engaged to who have already migrated abroad. So at a time when the Ottoman state did not require photographs of the empire's other subjects for travel documents, it mandated that Armenians and only Armenians sit for these photographs in order to emigrate. The state used state resources. The cost of these portraits came out of local police budgets to photograph families and visually document precisely those individuals, it was compelling to renounce their nationality in order to be able to emigrate. Now, other groups at the time, importantly, Christian Lebanese emigrants, were required to pledge to keep their Ottoman nationality in order to receive permission to travel abroad. Why did the departure of Armenians require such finality and photographic visibility? The photographs divesting these Armenians of their Ottoman nationality were motivated by suspicion. They were more akin to mugshots taken in anticipation of a crime not yet committed. I think of them as sort of anticipatory arrest warrants. They were intended to facilitate identification in the event of an undesired and dangerous future return. The state was worried that some of these individuals would return from sojourns abroad as revolutionaries and participate in uprisings against the state. Now, why did the state have this concern, right? And many of you will be very knowledgeable about this, but long before the 1915 genocide, there were several episodes of violence against Armenians in various parts of the empire, right? Intensifying in the Hamidian massacres of the mid to late 1890s. Now, in parallel, there was a growth in Armenian political organizations and occasional acts of violence. The Hunchak Party was formed in Geneva in 1887 and then moved its leadership to other European cities. And on the other hand, you know, we have the example of the Armenian Revolutionary Federation, the Dashnak Party, and very importantly, that on August 26, 1896, they occupied and threatened to bomb the Ottoman Bank in Istanbul in order to draw European attention to the plight of Armenians in the East. Now, up until this moment in 1896, Armenians were banned from emigrating abroad, right? Mark, I think, mentioned David Gutman's excellent recent book that talks about this in great detail. And Gutman claims that this ban stemmed from Abdülhamid's fear of a direct link between transhemispheric migration from the Ottoman East and the growth of Armenian political organizations, both inside and outside the empire, right? And I completely concur. Now, despite this ban, between 1888 and 1908, more than 40,000 people, the majority of whom were young Armenian men, left their home communities in the Ottoman East and migrated to North America. But until 1896, they were doing so illegally, right? And Gutman's book does a wonderful job of cataloging all of the various trials and tribulations and methods that they had to use to migrate. Now, a commission had been charged with investigating why Armenians were migrating and determining who or what was instigating them to do so. However, immediately following the 1896 Ottoman Bank incident, this same commission now turned to the Sultan and convinced him to provide a new legal pathway for Armenians to emigrate on the condition that they never return. So here's the official newspaper of October 9th, 1896, establishing the Takitavia renunciation of nationality process. The very first step in this process was for the individuals who wanted to emigrate to be photographed and for 2 copies of these images to be sent to police departments and ports. The agreement that the individuals in the images would never return to the empire was to be explained to them clearly and noted on their travel documents, right? And I think this is very important because I think with a concept like renunciation of nationality, we really need to think about what that means. It's certain that it doesn't mean the same thing as my renouncing my citizenship today. I think nationality was quite an abstract term for many of these populations. I've spent a lot of time looking at family correspondence sent from cities in the United States to the Ottoman Empire and back. And there's a letter in which a father is saying to his adult son, "Don't worry, I've sent the money for your ticket. You can come. This is a government thing. We don't understand the details, but you can feel safe. This is not an illegal passage. It is a safe passage." And so it also seems like in the original pronouncement of the amendment to the law, what the state is emphasizing is that these individuals should understand that they will be giving up the right to return. So if we go back to the Keshishian family's passport, you'll see just underneath the date, right, in French, and I'll just translate it, where it says, henceforth, they cannot return to the Ottoman Empire. And this is really a critical point here, I think. Okay, so let's see if we can do this. Can you all see me? Did I do that okay? All right. So families could not begin their journeys without these photographs circulating to the relevant officials, right? However, Takitavia photographs were not carried by the individuals in the photographs. I have no reason to believe that Mugurdic Keshishian, who you see here, ever saw this photograph, because the photograph was taken, copied, and sent to Istanbul, whereas Mugurdic and his family went to the port in order to board a ship. Yet what these photographs very clearly did was unmake these individuals as Ottoman nationals. Now, even though to date, I only know of 108 Takitavia photographs, I have been able to document that more than 1,500 of them were produced at one point, discrete images, not copies. And I can explain this again in Q&A, but I've produced a list of around 4,000 Ottoman Armenians by name who went through the Takitavia process between 1896 and 1908. So Portraits of Unbelonging, this project, is a double-sided history of migration, right? So what do I mean by that? Like each individual photograph, the project faces two directions. It faces the Ottoman past, in which the photograph was produced and circulated, and it faces an American future in which the lives of those captured in the image unfolded. So methodologically, what I've done is try to follow these two itineraries, the itinerary of the photographs as they circulated in bureaucracy and then in the archives, and then of the subjects whose mobility the photographs ensured. So while in one part of the project, I've been interested in a moment in bureaucratic time, right? The historical moment at which the Ottoman state decided to take these images. There's a second part of the project in which I investigate these portraits of unbelonging as capturing familial time, a moment in a particular family's migration history. So I'll share my screen again. Here we go. Okay. So part 2, encountering families, a moment in a family's history. Vahe Haig has suggested that in Ottoman provincial cities, such as Harput, the rise of studio photography itself was intimately linked to mass migration and families' desires to possess a picture of their loved ones, right? What came to be known as American fever surged in the 1880s and 1890s. And according to some sources, almost every family in towns such as Harput had at least one member who had migrated to America. Now, professional Armenian studio photographers took family portraits to commemorate a moment of togetherness before a son migrated, right? Or families would occasionally send these faraway sons new portraits as their siblings grew. They might also send portraits of eligible young girls that the bachelor might consider for a bride. All of which is to say, migration was good business for studio photographers, right? And Project Save's archive has many examples of photographs taken to be sent to loved ones abroad. This is a photograph that I think shows this really well, and I'm using the caption from Project Save. This is the Deradurian family, and the family posed for this photograph in Harpert, especially to send it to their eldest son, who was working at the time in Worcester, Massachusetts. Now, this is a good moment to say, one of the most important things I learned early on in this project is I had thought that I was working on Ottoman photography. And of course, it became abundantly clear that Ottoman photography is Armenian photography, in the sense that so many of the photographers in the Ottoman Empire were Armenians. And it was a business that was passed on in the family, right? Especially outside of Istanbul and in the region that we're talking about today. Almost all of the photographers were Armenians. So I was not, it made sense to me that there was simply nobody else to take the Takitavia photographs in this region. And indeed, many of the Takitavia photographs appear to have been taken by professional studio photographers, right? Here is Eugene. This is, you can see she's very visibly pregnant in this photograph, and she's flanked here by her daughter Ozalina and her son Sarkis. And here on the bottom right of the reverse of the photograph, you see the stamp of studio photographer Alexander Papazian of Erzurum, right? Similar to family portraits taken in such studios, these photographs show individuals posing against studio backdrops or standing next to an ornate plaster column. But if you look very closely, here you have to look, you can see the wall that the backdrop has been placed against right there. Almost all of the photographs were taken outside in makeshift studios, suggesting that the photographers might have traveled to smaller towns to produce some of these images. Now, almost 30 of the Takitavia photographs that I've been able to find today bear the stamp of the Encabian brothers of Sivas, such as all of these. Others bear the stamp of Archak Jakubian of Sivas and the Dildilian brothers of Marzvan, which of course Armen Marsubian has told us so much about in his wonderful books and exhibitions. So for the photographers, I wonder, was this but one genre of photography among many, or were they coerced to take these photographs? How were these sittings perhaps different than others, right? And here is why I can't overemphasize how important a resource a place like Project Save Archive is for scholars like myself, because you can't do a meaningful comparison with just two photographs. You really need to be able to compare large samples of photographs. And so in December, last December, I visited Project Save and the wonderful team up in the archive there. And I looked at all of the photographs that were taken in the empire before 1910. And I had a very strong sense that even when the shutter was released by the same Armenian studio photographers, there was something palpably different about the Takitaviat images, about the renunciation of nationality photographs. For weeks, I didn't know exactly how to articulate this difference. It was the type of thing that kept me up at night. But then thanks to Ruth Tomasian's introduction, I had the extraordinary honor of visiting Claire Encabian, the daughter of Karakin Encabian, one of the two brothers behind the Encabian studio of Sivas. Together, this is the lovely Claire Encabian, who will be hopefully celebrating her 101st birthday in August. Together, Claire and I looked at all the Takitavia photographs that bear the Encabian stamp, and we compared them to family portraits in her possession taken by her uncle and her father. Now, to my delight, in one of those moments of just sheer luck in research, Claire Encabian was not only the direct descendant of the Encabian brothers, right, the photographers who had taken so many of the Takitavia photographs, but she herself had worked in a photography studio for over 50 years, into her 80s. So she was an authority in photography herself. And we took our time looking through all the family portraits and comparing them to the Takitavia photographs side by side. And then she pointed to the Takitavia photographs and provided the words that I had lacked. There's no love in these photographs. Okay. How does a photograph matter? How does it matter for the state, for the descendants, and differently for a scholar? And I would not have undertaken this research were it not for the photographs. And perhaps in Q&A, you'll allow me to elaborate why that's the case. For now, I'm showing you my office, partly to remember when we used to work in offices, but also this is my office before I moved to Rutgers. But it was an office that I shared with about 350 individuals, as you can see. And it was in this office that day after day, I spent all my time in front of these photographs and thought, okay, my aim in Portraits of Unbelonging is to tell a history of mass migration on an intimate scale. How? By tracing the stories of the families in these photographs over a century, in the bureaucratic files that unmake them as Ottoman subjects, on the ship manifests that track their migration routes, in the census and naturalization records that document their new lives as immigrants and eventually as American citizens, and finally in the family albums of their descendants today. So of the 108 images identified as Takitavia photographs that I began with, I found migration information for 53 families. So either tickets, arrival information, departure information, ship manifests, etc. Together with my amazing students, thanks to powerful digital platforms that aggregate American public records, also Mark Aslan's fantastic Armenian immigration project, and thanks to the popularity of genealogy searches among Americans today, we identified 30 descendants, direct descendants of 37 families. And to date, I've had the pleasure of meeting with descendants of individuals in 12 photographs, sorry, 12 photographs, there we are. That means people who knew someone in the photograph as a parent, mother, father, or grandparent. I'm still looking for descendants of individuals in the other photographs. Please reach out to me if you think your family might be among them, or if you'd like to see a list of families that I'm still trying to identify relatives for. Now, these encounters with the families have truly been some of the highlights of my research career. All of the families so far have allowed me to film our encounters. And when Maggie initially invited me to the Exclusion Museum in May, I was really hoping to share some of the footage of these encounters with you. However, we've decided that Zoom might not support video. So instead, I'd like to share some of the things that I've been able to learn. How are we doing on time? Can I take a little bit more time? Okay. sort of what happens and what kind of research can be advanced when I get to actually meet the families. One of the reasons I'm trying to capture this as a documentary film is because these encounters themselves are so rich, right? When I go to meet with the descendant of an individual in a Takitavia photograph, of course, I take them a copy. So this is the Simonian family from Bitlis. Right down here, we have Carnegie Simonian, and I had the great pleasure of meeting Gary Simonian, his youngest son, in 2018. And here you can see Gary is telling his wife, Elena, the story of his family's migration with the photograph. So in these encounters, there are many encounters happening at the same time. I am encountering the descendants, they're encountering the photograph, they're often encountering their ancestors who they only knew as very old people, as young people. And we are together encountering both their reaction to the photograph and to the historical information that I'm bringing with it. Looking together, we have been able to open entirely new questions for this research. So let me show you two of the puzzles that I've been working on that I think will really, well, at the very least, it'll show you a little bit of how I work with photography. So here you have the Takitavia photograph of the Shamshoyan family, Bogos, his wife Makrui, and then the little boy Zakar, who is standing, and Harutyun. On a genealogy website, I came across this photograph on the right, which shows the same family after their arrival in front of the boarding house in Rhode Island. The family member who put this up said the photograph was courtesy of Alan Uzunian, who is a very knowledgeable and experienced Armenian genealogist. So essentially, I could recognize, first of all, the family members, right? So you see Bogos here, and his wife, and the two boys, once again, Zakar, and then Harutyun. Now, the family dates the photograph, the second photograph from Rhode Island, as from the summer of 1908. I'm wondering if it might not be the following spring because of the children. Oh, sorry, but it's immaterial. So this photograph was posted alongside another photograph, right? This time captioned, "Sweet picture of a father with his two daughters." So suddenly I knew that Makrui had a sister who was also in the United States. And this is where my research wall came in very handy, because after spending some time staring at this photograph, I thought, I know that young woman on the right. And in fact, I did. She was one of the young women that you saw earlier in this presentation in the individual photographs taken in Harpert. So what this allowed us to do was see that these two photographs that we were interpreting as two separate photographs were actually part of a kin network. And don't worry, I didn't rely just on my visual recognition of the woman. Then I was able to match up all of the biographical details, father's names, etc. And the great, again, one of these moments of tremendous fortune was that the woman on the right, Miriam, is Alan Uzunian's grandmother. So I got to take this to somebody who's been working on Armenian genealogy for over 40 years. And together we pieced together that, in fact, not only had the two sisters come together, but also that two other photographs of individual young women were also cousins. Why is this important? Because it begins to give us a sense of how families negotiated this migration together, but also how to open up questions like, why was the Ottoman state photographing these women individually, if that makes sense. Alan then told me the story that Bogos the father had come to the United States after the birth of his younger daughter because his wife had died in childbirth, and then 18 years later, he had been able to send money to bring over his 2 daughters and his older daughter's family, right? And not only did I get a chance to meet Alan, but I also got to meet the 2 children, Zach Sham and Roberta Hooper, of this little baby Harutian last year. And I hope that we'll do another event when I can show you some of the footage of that encounter. So before I show you the last example, let me just say that this photograph is very important for me because, of course, the way it is interpreted, right, by many people who I show it to is that the Takitavia photographs show life as it was in the old country, and then they arrived in the United States and look how they have prospered, right? And that sort of image of the prospering new American is captured here in the photograph in the middle. Now, I emphasize the importance of that frame because it shaped even how I looked at the last family image I'll share with you today, which is one you've seen many times before. It's the Keshishian family's Takitavia photograph. Here they're labeled as the Caprelian family because that's how they appeared on the ship manifest, and that was the name they went by thereafter. Now, we also found a photograph of the Caprelian family. Now, on the right, I would call this photograph a family portrait proper, a photograph that the family commissioned for itself, paid for itself. On the left is their Takitavia photographed. Back to my wall, and again, this was, interpreted typically as here's what they look like in the old country before they came to the United States. They arrived in the United States, prospered, and lived full, happy lives. Spending a lot of time looking at these photos over and over again, of course, you notice certain patterns. And so one day I was thinking about this plaster column in the Encabian studio in Sivas. And of course, then I finally recognized that this plaster column was also in the Caprelian family's photograph. So therefore, I had it all wrong. And this photograph must have been taken in Sivas before the Takitavia photograph on the right. Now that I've told it to you, you're probably going to say, well, how could you have gotten it wrong? Why on earth would the younger brother Rupen have been wearing a fez in the United States, right? Or clearly, Mugurdich's wife Aznif is very pregnant here for the little boy Sirop, who would be born shortly before the family left for the United States. But what I want to emphasize is that working with photograph requires at least me to constantly be thinking about the frameworks through which I'm making interpretations and to look for ways that I can really question them. So I wanted to share this image with you. And I'll add that when I got to meet with, so far I've only been able to meet with the great-granddaughter of Aznif and Mugurdich, and she told me that in fact, Sirop died of diphtheria a year and a half after they arrived in the United States. And so this is the only photograph that exists of the little boy. So I will say thank you and stop now. Oops, but before I do that, I'm going to shamelessly ask for your help if you've listened this far, and say that Soline mentioned in December I had made several discoveries. One of the things was that I came across this photograph of the Tarzian family taken in the Ottoman Empire. As you can see, aesthetically, it looks very much like a Takitavia photograph taken in Harpert. Unfortunately, we only have the front of the photograph, but it opens all of these questions about whether or not anybody ever actually got to travel with these photographs. So I want to end by asking you 3 questions. 1, please flip over any portraits you may have taken in the Ottoman Empire before 1909 and check if there is Ottoman script on it. If it is a Takitavia photograph, it will definitely have the standardized script on it and all of the biographical information. 2, please ask yourself, might you or someone you know be a descendant of one of the families whose photographs I've encountered but haven't been able to find yet? Please be in touch if you'd like to see a list. I've put my email up here. And then finally, please reach out if you've ever heard, read, or come across stories of a family or individual about to migrate being photographed for the Ottoman state. And I think I better stop there so we have time for some questions. So thank you very much for listening.